Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Asian NATO? Okay, let's learn. My name's Connor. If you're new, the original link to the video, top of the description from TLDR News Global. Isn't it usually preemptive, like, why Japan's new PM is starting an Asian NATO? Okay, interesting.
Brought to you by Incogni. Japan has a new prime minister, its fourth in as many years, after Shigeru Ishiba won the ruling party's unpredictable and close-run leadership election last week. Ishiba's election is notable not least because it was his fifth and self-declared final bid for the party's leadership, but also because he described himself as a defense otaku, or defense policy geek, and has called for the creation of an Asian version of NATO. So in this video, we're going to take a look at this proposal and explain the significant effect that Ishiba's victory could have on Japan's defense, security, and foreign policy, including its relationships with the likes of China, North Korea, South Korea, and the United States. Before we start, if you haven't already...
So in the thumbnail, I think I saw Australia, Philippines, Taiwan. Interesting. Sorry, that's my other video. And then Japan, South Korea, USA. Okay. Alrighty. Good crew.
Please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Before we start, if you're interested in global alliances and groupings like the one proposed here, then you might like our brand new poster, Every Global Alliance Explained, which shows in slightly confusing detail how every country interacts with each other. It's available by clicking the link in the description, and for a limited time you can get 30% off using code JAPAN. Now, make
sure if you're interested there, use the code Japan, guys. It helps the channel out here.
The idea of an Asian NATO, we're going to need to give you some more context. And we're going to start with a brief explainer of the recent Japanese leadership election. The Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP, has ruled Japan for nearly all of the past 7 decades, with just 2 short stints out of power. Now, the party was thrust into a leadership election following the resignation of the party's leader and Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida. Kishida's approval ratings had hit historic lows, and public
when did that happen?
Trust and support for the LDP had been eroded by a series of scandals, most notably one that involved some of the party's most powerful factions misreporting donations and using secret slush funds to provide kickbacks to lawmakers. With a record 9 candidates, Kishida's resignation set up perhaps the most unpredictable and open party leadership election for decades, particularly as the LDP had dissolved virtually all of its influential factions in the wake of the slush fund scandal. Anyway, after no candidate won outright in the first round, a runoff was held between the top 2 candidates, Shigeru Ishiba, who comes second, and Economic Security Minister Sanai Takeichi, who had won the first round. Now, they may be from the same party, but you probably can't get 2 more contrasting candidates. Takeichi, hoping to become Japan's first female prime minister, was the main candidate from the party's nationalist right wing, and was a protege of the former prime minister Shinzo Abe. By contrast, Ishiba, a former defense minister, was a more moderate and reformist candidate, and has been an outspoken critic of the previous LDP administrations, something that helped him become popular with the public, but has strained his relationship with party heavyweights. In particular, Ishiba was a notable critic of Shinzo Abe's rule, making him unpopular with the LDP's right wing. Regardless, Ishiba won the runoff in what was a pretty surprising victory, making him the LDP's new leader and Japan's new prime minister. So, what will Ishiba's defense and foreign policies actually look like? Fortunately for us, the former defense minister has been in politics for quite...
I had no idea this stuff happened. How long ago is this?
Some time now, and is said to have an obsession with defense policy. Now, Ishiba is not unusual in the LDP in that he wants to amend Japan's pacifist constitution to account for the existence of the Japan Self-Defense Forces, the country's de facto military. However, he has advocated for actually scrapping...
Okay, so I'm not that crazy. It happened 3 days ago.
...defense policy. Now, Ishiba is not unusual in the LDP in that he wants to amend Japan's pacifist constitution to account for the existence of the Japan Self-Defense Forces, the country's de facto military. However, he is advocated for actually scrapping rather than just amending Article 9, Clause 2, which states that Japan will never maintain military forces and war potential, as well as rejecting the right of belligerency. Ishiba's headline defense proposal
right of belligerency. The status of two or more entities, usually sovereign states, that are engaged in a war. The state of being at war in conflict where a recognized military force is granted the protection of the international laws of war. Well, okay, so the right of belligerency just means you're allowed to respond if you're attacked. Wouldn't that go without saying? A state of belligerency can exist even if a declaration of war is not made. A nation is considered belligerent even if it resorts to war to punish or withstand an aggressor. Okay, no, okay. So you won't have a standing military force, but if people bug you enough and push you around, you can start to become a regular wartime force. I think that's what that means.
As well as rejecting the...
And by the way, we need Japan in the near future. Well, if you're the U.S., not if... It depends.
Right to maintain military forces and war potential, as well as rejecting the right of belligerency. Ishiba's headline defense proposal, though, is the creation of what he calls an Asian NATO, i.e. a NATO-style collective defense organization for allied Asian nations. Pointing to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Ishiba has said that wars are likely to break out in Asia because there's no obligation of mutual defense, and an Asian NATO is essential to deter China from invading Taiwan, for example. Ishiba has not set out a step-by-step plan for how such an organization would be created, but he has given a rough idea. He points out that through its alliance with the United States, Japan has a quasi-alliance relationship with Canada, Australia, the Philippines, India, France, and the United Kingdom. And Japan also has been deepening its security cooperation with South Korea. Ishiba says that if these alliances are upgraded to a hub-and-spoke system with the Japan-US alliance at the core, it will be possible to develop it into an Asian NATO. This Asian NATO, Ishiba says, must ensure deterrence against the...
So you would think that Japan and South Korea would be much more close out the bat, but it's because, correct me if I'm wrong, of still some bad feelings towards Japanese occupation of Korea in World War II, right?
Asian NATO. This Asian NATO, Ishiba says, must ensure deterrence against the nuclear alliance of China, Russia, and North Korea, and therefore must specifically consider America's sharing of nuclear weapons or the introduction of nuclear weapons in the region. His idea would unsurprisingly cause tensions with China, as would Ishiba's ties with Taiwan. He visited the island last month, for example. However, of the two candidates in the final round, Ishiba was also the least hawkish on China. He's argued that Japan should pursue win-win diplomacy with China, and that strengthening deterrence should go alongside efforts to reduce tensions and bolster cooperation on certain issues. Takaichi, on the other hand, would have angered China by visiting the controversial Yasukuni Shrine, which honors Japan's war dead, including convicted war criminals, a move that would also strain ties with South Korea. Regardless, could Ishiba's vision of an Asian NATO actually come to fruition? It's not impossible, but the biggest stumbling block is the United States, which has already rebuffed the idea as too hasty, preferring instead to pursue the building of a lattice work of US alliances in the region. Critics of Ishiba's idea say that it's an unwise and unrealistic prospect, and that Asia doesn't have the necessary strategic alignment that the North Atlantic does. A more likely outcome, then, is the continued development of bilateral and trilateral.
But the Philippines and South Korea, especially South Korea and Japan, are all already extremely tied together militarily. So why is the North Atlantic countries anymore? What's the word he used?
Prospect. And Asia doesn't have the necessary strategic alignment.
They don't have the necessary strategic alignment. So they have different aims? That doesn't make sense to me. But
that the North Atlantic does.
My question, guys, is why doesn't it?
A more likely outcome, then, is the continued development of bilateral and trilateral relationships, which, to be fair to Ishiba, is what he says would be necessary as a precursor to any such alliance anyway. But the gap between Ishiba and the US on an Asian NATO is not the only way that Ishiba could strain ties with the US. While being committed to the US-Japan partnership, Ishiba differs from his predecessors in that he wants to fundamentally change its structure. Ishiba views the US-Japan Security Treaty as deeply asymmetrical, even writing that he does not believe that Japan is a truly independent country yet. He says that he wants to make it an alliance of equal partners, adding that it should be on par with the US-UK alliance. Some ideas he's floated include allowing Japan greater involvement in the management of US bases in Japan, perhaps making them joint operations, or even stationing Japanese troops on US soil, for instance in Guam. Ishiba also thinks that Japan should play a greater role.
All right, I was on board. Let's not be hasty here. Look, I think that makes complete sense. You know, I think it's true that Japan isn't really a fully independent country in a sense because of how can you be a fully independent country if you don't have full control over your own military capabilities, right? So I don't know how you can argue that's not the case. On to Guam, let's chill there though on the second half. I think this is the same thing. Same with Germany. I mean, Germany is much more connected with a lot of like if the USA were to disappear, okay? I'm sure a lot of people would love that, all right? I would. I think that Europe would be much more capable of yeah, it'd be not great. You'd lose a lot of military capabilities, but there are a lot of independent actors that are strong in Europe that Germany is surrounded by. I'm using Germany as an example because of its like you know, post World War II is occupied, and you could argue the same thing. It's not fully independent or hasn't or wasn't of the U.S. But if the U.S. were to go and pull out of the Pacific, these countries are much more vulnerable. But I don't see why we're still keeping or treating Japan like there's a threat of them becoming the Japanese Empire again if they're allowed their own military autonomy, separate from the USA.
Through mutual consultations in deciding how nuclear weapons should be used to deter threats. For Ishiba, these are far from easy concessions to secure, and his past comments suggest that he'll do more than just politely ask, saying back in 2018 that Japan would be ignored if it pledged total fealty to the US. He said, "You don't have to play golf with President Trump or go to Trump Tower. It's important to make them think that Japan is formidable, and we need to have the cards to play for a deal." Ishiba's first challenge, though, is winning the snap general election that he's called for October 27th, evidently hoping to use the goodwill afforded to him as new Prime Minister to secure the LDP another term in office and provide him a mandate from the public. Now, as we've demonstrated in this video, there's a huge amount of uncertainty in the world of politics and current affairs, often with very few easy solutions. Unfortunately, this can be the case online too. There are all kinds of bad actors out there who want to try and use you to make a quick buck. Take, for instance, data brokers. They collect, aggregate, and sell your personal information, including names, aliases, social security numbers, login credentials shared by the data brokers. Again, they conduct incognito. You'll get an exclusive 60% off. And plus, if you use our link, you'll get an exclusive 60% off.
If you're interested in incognito, is it like a sort of VPN?
To work on your behalf and sit back as they make you safer. Plus, if you
I want to make sure I comment on
use our link.
Very interesting video. I can see it as being a little too hasty, but I also understand some of Japan's arguments. And you can't always be like make all of your decision making based on not wanting to anger China. At some point, you have to stand up for yourself. And I understand the complicated past with China and Japan, with with all of Southeast Asia and Japan. Okay, but it's 2024. Okay, almost 2025. I think Japan definitely needs some more autonomy. That's from my limited knowledge, obviously. Would love to see what you guys have to think. Would love to hear what you guys have to say. Jesus Christ. Love y'all. Hope you guys are all doing well. And hopefully I'll see you guys next video. Bye, guys.